be recording. There we go. We will be recording this today to send out afterwards. So if that's an issue for you, just pop a hand up, or you can, of course, drop out. The recording will be later popped up on our website, and it will be accessible through all the hub newsletters that we send out. And a final note of housekeeping throughout the webinar, feel free to use the chat function. I can see some comments coming through already, so that's lovely. Feel free to use that for a question or a comment. We will be monitoring it and answering questions when we can. Okay, I would also like to just start by acknowledging the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, waters, and community. We pay our respect to elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. By way of introductions, many of you will know me, but for those of you who don't, I'm Stacey Slavin. I'm the General Manager of Plus, and that means I sit across our day program in Frenchs Forest and our specialist team of behaviour support practitioners. Joining me today is Alex Brown, who has been a senior support coordinator with Fighting Chance for several years, and now she works as our internal NDIS support manager. I personally like to think of Alex as an NDIS ninja, but Alex, perhaps you'd like to say a bit more about yourself in greater detail.
Thanks, Stacey. Hi, everyone. I've met some of you, but not all of you. As Stacey said, I've been with Fighting Chance for a number of years, in a couple of different roles. Prior to that, or for the over 10 years now, I've been working in the NDIS space. And I also have a son on the scheme, so um, have some understanding from both sides. I'll hand back to Stacey now.
Thanks, Alex. Now, I recognize that, like me, many of you have probably been participants or families connected to Fighting Chance for a long time. But for those of you who aren't, I'll quickly explain how our programs hang together. So, under that Fighting Chance umbrella are four enterprises that share common values, share headquarters supports, and really are tied together by our ethos and, of course, by our founders. The first is Avenue, which is our day program alternative, supporting people within work-like micro-enterprise teams. Then there's Jigsaw, our supported employment enterprise, and of course Plus, our day program and clinical team for people with complex behaviors. And finally, Base is our supported independent living arm. You'll see that throughout the slides and in many of our examples, we refer to Plus, and that's only because that's where most of our participants with behaviour support requirements sit. But all the information we're about to provide is generalizable across other settings. Okay, why are we talking about this? I actually asked Alex to give me a hand with preparing some of this information because particularly within Plus, I've started to see a number of people having decreases or drops in their funding, especially within our day program. This often looks like an email to me or a phone call to me from a really distressed parent or a support coordinator telling me that they were perhaps seeking SIL funding, and when a new plan came in, their complex and intensive funding was lessened, or maybe their specialist behaviour support amount decreased. It can be that they underwent a standard plan review process expecting nothing would change, and instead of complex, their person came back funded at standard rates or even at a lesser ratio, support ratio. And that can be really stressful for families, as I'm sure many of you know. And so I asked Alex to help shed some light on exactly what is happening, why it's happening, and how we can work together to help you. Alex?
Thanks, Stacey. And yeah, so today we thought that we would shed a bit of light, give a bit of context to what's happening, and what we've been seeing for the last 12 or so months. However, we're seeing it increasing more and more. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about, we will talk about both behaviour support and complex and intensive day program support, how the NDIA are assessing both, and a bit of context around that, and sort of what that means moving forward in terms of what we can do to um, ensure that the information going to the agency is helping them to make an informed decision, and separate both so they can make a clear and informed decision about both supports. So as mentioned, today we're talking about both. So if I and I know that for some people, um, they may just have behaviour support funding, so clinical behaviour support, and for others it might just be complex and intensive support in the day program around supervision, and some might have both. Um, Either way, we will be talking about them, and both might be necessary. And the NDIA often sees them as separate things. So when we get to the part around documentation, we want to make sure that that's super clear. So just wanted to set the scene to say that. We'll be speaking about both today. And we might be speaking a bit about plus examples and stuff might come up. However, we're talking more generally in fighting chance. So yeah, I'll try and use fighting chance, but if I say plus or avenue, then yeah, apologies there. So, just want to also set before starting to talk, this is not because you guys are doing less or needs have reduced or you haven't explained things properly, or staff aren't doing the right thing. Um, all the needs are still there and everything. The NDIA has is applying the rules a little differently now. Where it comes down to, and I'm sure there's a lot people have seen in the media, is around scheme sustainability. And so they're applying different rules, the rules differently to those higher cost supports and looking at them a bit more closely. So the NDIA still makes funding decisions around Section 34 of the NDIS Act. So that has not changed. Supports must always be related to the person's disability that they've met access for. It must be seen as effective and beneficial, value for money, not replacing any other supports or any other systems, and linking to the individual's goals. So that the legislation has not changed. So what's changed is how strictly that criteria is being applied, particularly for higher cost and intensive supports. As mentioned, they're applying the rules more strictly. They're looking more closely at those higher cost supports, and they're asking for more clear and more specific evidence. And these changes are happening across Australia, and they are affecting many families, so not just plus families or people through fighting chance. So previously, behaviour support was often funded when it was when someone was in a meeting or in a report, the NDIA was seeing speak of or explanations of distress or dysregulation for that individual as a direct result of the disability that they had met access for. But now the funding decisions focus on that ongoing safety risk and that risk of harm to the participant and to others, and whether the risk continues despite other supports already in place. So a big question that the NDIA are asking when they're reviewing the reports or even in the meetings that you guys are having, whether it be a check-in or a full reassessment, is if the appropriate supports are in place and does the risk still remain? So when we talk about risk and avoidable, so when they think that they ask that question and the person might say, yes, when we change this, this, and this, then the risk reduces. They would consider this to be avoidable risk, but they're using more and more the term unavoidable risk during reviews and reassessments. And that's where they're really clearly wanting to see that that risk continues when the right supports are in place. So, unavoidable risk would be generally understood that it happens even with consistent routines and supports. It occurs across different environments. It continues even with trained staff or familiar people. And it cannot be fully reduced through supervision, environmental changes, or reassurance alone. So, and I understand as well that. People are complex, our participants are complex, and we also want to put fantastic supports in place so we do have avoidable risk. Yeah, just want to say and explain what they mean by unavoidable risk.
Um, sorry, Alexandra, can I ask a question? My name's Silvana. Are you able to give an example? Because that
Yeah, of
makes it
course.
more clear.
Stacey, do you want to maybe give an example?
Yeah,
Is
I
this the
can I can
appropriate
talk.
time to ask, or
Of
do
no,
I
no,
wait?
of course, it makes it way more engaging as well. So please ask away. But Stacey has some great examples because she's on the floor a lot, and so I might hand over to her to give an example.
Yeah, sure.
Thank
Um,
you.
and without wanting to reach confidence, but we see a lot of people who, and this is a real challenge for us when speaking with the NDIA or reporting to the NDIA. We see a lot of people who will have increased behavior or a greater amount of dysregulation when they are challenged to do new things. So we're trying to marry up this excellent thing, which is skill development and pushing someone outside of their comfort zone in order to develop, life skills or coping skills. But we know that often before there's an improvement, there's a dip. And so where someone has been baseline for a long time, and then when they are looking at a new task and feeling really unsure about it, and their behavior will escalate or be triggered, that I think, Alex, am I right? That technically is avoidable risk because we are the ones that have introduced something new. Had we not introduced that new activity, steady as she goes. Whereas there are some people who, no matter what non-support worker they're with, no matter what environment they're in, no matter what's happened that morning or what else might be going on in their life, they're almost always at risk of an escalation, and that is something about them rather than the way that we are supporting them.
So basically, this is what you mean by unavoidable risk. It doesn't matter. Things could be going swimmingly, and the participant is still at risk. Is that right? Is that what you
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah. And so and we're kind of describing it from the way the NDIA are seeing it or assessing it.
Mhm.
So we can sort of see the chat. Well, if we take those supports away, then there's going to be there's risk to that individual when but what they're trying to distinguish between, and this is something that similar to home and living support and a lot of supports in place when the NDIA rolled out for many reasons, they rolled the scheme out and put things in place that was replacing the old systems. But they've had to kind of bring it back a little bit because the scheme to sustain the scheme. So what they're trying to do and when they talk about unavoidable risk now and funding behavior support and complex and intensive, they're trying to separate the two. That can't always be separated, but understanding that is understanding the context behind and the language behind what they're trying to say can help with informing them in the most appropriate way so they can make a decision about the individual's funding.
So basically, if you when you're trying to teach them a new task, there can be some sort of resistance. So they're not referring to that, as you just said. It's more when it's um, when you're just consistent with whatever they're doing with routines.
Yeah.
That's, yeah,
So they're starting to go that they're not saying that that's not going to be funded. They're just saying that we need to assess that more carefully before making a funding decision. Is
mm,
behavior support and complex and intensive the most appropriate support when we're considering um, the reason for that support? Is it more appropriate for that individual, or do we need to support them in a different way? And
mhm.
so that's the decision that the NDIA are making and how they're separating the two, whereas before they were funding both sides. Um,
Okay,
so now
yeah,
we're seeing a little bit more resistance when we're not communicating, or when or when for that individual, those risks are avoidable. So we might start to see, and I can't say that's going to happen for everyone because it literally, some people, the NDIA are meant to be consistent across Australia, but they are absolutely not. Every planner assesses differently, but it's just explaining what, if that word comes up or those words come up, what that means from the NDIA's point of view.
okay, thank you. So,
Thanks, Alex. We just got a quick question in the chat, which I can get to. Someone asked about what we mean by concerning behaviours. So the actual definition of behaviours of concern are actions of such intensity, frequency, or duration that they threaten the physical safety or emotional well-being of the person or those around them. So what sorts of behaviors we think about in line with that are self-injurious behaviors, aggression toward other people, significant property damage, so it might be throwing items at walls or punching holes in walls, absconding for someone who has no traffic or road safety awareness, weaponizing. So yeah, I think it's important to differentiate between behaviors of concern and challenging behaviors. So, for instance, someone who likes to, I don't know, collect 1,000 pens before they leave the house every day. That's a challenging behavior because it might take you a long time to leave the house, but that's not a concerning behavior because no one's safety is at is risked. So I hope that helps. Over to you, Alex.
No, thank you. Um, and it's good to make that clear distinction. So what we're seeing, or how we're seeing that affecting specialist behavior support, um, is that it's more likely, not guaranteed, but more likely to be funded where there is that documented ongoing risk, where there's the evidence of potential harm and the clear record of strategies implemented and evidence that that risk persists. So if the documentation doesn't clearly show that persistent risk, behavior support may not be funded ongoing. The other side of it is the NDIA, they always have, from the get-go, they have spoken about being a capacity building scheme. So they are about reducing supports over time. And this is part of what they're focused on around scheme sustainability, but also provide, like, really weighing up that balance. And they're trying to get it right, to weigh up that balance around, if we've funded behavior support for a number of years, we should we should be able to take it away over time or reduce it over time. That isn't always the case. So people have different needs and different level of capacity, and there's many people out there who don't have the capacity to build that capacity. And so what it becomes is the NDIS supports for them becomes around maintaining the capacity at the level that it is, and removing that would result in a decline. And so the purpose of understanding all of this today, and we'll go a little bit into documentation in a bit, but the purpose of understanding the context is to really help you guys when communicating to the agency, but also when you read that report from the clinician or from the day program, it isn't there to not highlight those huge strengths and milestones and wins that your people are having, but it's to really show the NDIA that while there's progress, there's still that room for building those skills. So that support is still reasonable and necessary. So setting the context and giving you guys a little bit of background hopefully will help you guys to feel a little bit more empowered when speaking to the agency because you come in with a little bit more understanding is the intention. And so we'll go on to how it affects the complex and intensive. So in a similar way, but the support is assessed more closely, and the NDIA may ask. And when I say ask, I don't mean ask directly. It might be that they have these questions in their head when they're reading the supporting documentation. So why 1-to-1 is required? What specific risk requires 2-to-1? Is the intensity proportionate to the documented risk? And what would occur if supervision reduced? So support levels always needed to be justified, but even more now it really needs to be linked to that documented risk and that functional impact. And staff at Fighting Chance are aware of that. And so that's when their writing needs to really highlight those things.
Just a quick point, Alex. You said that the NDIA may or may not ask. It would actually be lovely if they asked,
Yeah.
wouldn't it? Because then we'd know exactly, and parents and families would know exactly what they need to provide. But this is why we're having this webinar today, because often you are left on your own to figure out what you were meant to have provided or you were meant to have asked from your NDIS providers. So yeah, just wanted to acknowledge that it's very vague and clear as mud is an overstatement. But yeah, it's not for you to feel that you have done the wrong thing, as we said earlier, but it's never made clear to families exactly what they're meant to go into a plan review with.
And yeah, exactly. And and a lot of people around plan reviews, and obviously with the reforms and changes now coming into ICANN and everything in the middle of the year, there is a lot of anxiety around communicating with the agency. When there was the change from PROTA to PACE, when people are just being called for a check-in, but then get a new plan. So there's all of this anxiety already. And then, so I just saw that comment. So, I'll just explain really super fast. Proto used to be the old system that the NDIA worked from, their CRM system. So they held all the participant data there. They completed all of their plan reviews and access requests and everything through that program. And then they shifted, it would have been a couple of years ago now, and there's still people sitting on Proto, but a lot of people have transitioned to PACE now. And PACE is a different system that they're working from. However, they have a little bit more control around when a support needs to be changed. They don't have to reassess the entire plan and give an entire new plan to the individual. They can reassess just a part of it. However, when they do get that request in, they do look at the whole plan holistically and ensure that it is still most appropriate for the individual. So that's Proto and PACE. ICANN is an assessment tool that the NDIA have decided that they are going to start to use from the middle of this year. It's going to take 5 or 6 years to roll out, but it's going to, they believe, replace reviews, and it will be the review process. And so they're using this ICANN tool. But I guess my point is there's always changes. There's always information, there's always things coming in and out from the media and everything. And so it's quite anxiety provoking going into these meetings or having these phone calls. When little shifts change, even with, how the rule is applied or how scheme sustainability is impacting those higher cost supports, it becomes a little bit more unsettling and unsteady when going in, because they can throw different things or different words at a person, and who how is the person meant to know? And so it can be very, as Stacey said, vague and unclear. And so coming in with a little bit more understanding with um, can help with feeling a little bit more confident when communicating to the agency, but also when seeing the reports and documentation, or when requesting a provider for reports or documentation, you can go in with a little bit more of, I need this, this, and this, even if you haven't been explicitly told by the NDIA. You've got that understanding. Um, I've seen that there's a few comments in there. I might just finish off this part one, and then we can see if there's any questions before we go into part two. So what's often not funded on its own, as we've kind of touched on, is emotional distress or anxiety, and shutdowns and withdrawal distress that's mainly linked to fatigue or transitions, or family care or exhaustion. And I do not say that lightly, nor do I say that those experiences don't matter. They absolutely do. The NDIA can often, if that's the justification for support for behaviour support or complex and intensive, they may look at it a little bit differently moving now and moving forward around what other support might be more appropriate for them to fund. And knowing that, we know that when we're explaining, if that's the case, or if that's not the case, we want to really be clearly documenting and justifying the supports and why they're needed, and explain that there is that ongoing safety risk.
Thanks, Alex. So there are a few questions in the chat. I am conscious of time though, but um, just a recent one from Sarah. They she's had a plan review sprung on them. Any no time to get documentation together. Functional assessment from 2024. Any tips on persuading them to accept that as evidence?
Um, it's tricky. So when going into, you can request an extension. Just so you know, please know that you can, or if you have had a plan review sprung on you, and they're saying, "Oh, we're going to do it," you can say, "I need some more time to gather evidence. Can we please extend this out by 6 weeks?" If the plan is going to end or run out, it will extend or roll into another plan period. If they say no, what you could do then is, when you're in the meeting, you could say, "This is the only supporting documentation that I have. However, this doesn't really describe or identify the supports that are required right now and why. So I understand that you're going to build the plan based on this supporting documentation. However, can it be noted that I will put in a change of situation when I have that additional documentation?" And it can be noted on the system, and you can add that in after, and they can assess and make those relevant changes through the PACE system just in those areas. So there are alternatives to that, but please know that you can say that time doesn't work. I need some more time to get supporting documentation, have that conversation.
Thanks, Alex. And then perhaps we can just do one more quickly. So Thomasina is talking about a scenario which we're fairly familiar with, where her person sorry, I'll just read it. The NDIA appear to be more interested in incident reporting. We've put in so much effort as a team with preventative strategies, so there are probably fewer and fewer incidents. But that level of behavior, although not severe, is still quite high. It sort of feels like the scheme is targeting more profound populations that can't advocate for themselves. So how do we do data collection for people who are still at risk of those behaviors, but their supports are so excellent. And their support workers have also adjusted to a new normal, which is that incidents happen. It doesn't feel as severe when they're happening all the time.
Um, Annoying as it is, they are looking at or linking to incidents because that is helping them to determine or distinguish between the two. Is this a support we can reduce or remove, or is this a support we need to keep in place because there's still things going on? Um, and so they are looking at incidences to kind of determine the two, which for, good or bad, that's just how it is. I would say that I understand that it's really painful and it's also hard because you're like, well, no, this is there's been so much achieved and it's so much more improved than what it was. So I don't really feel like I need to write the incident reports. Even for the escalations or behaviors of concern that don't seem as severe anymore. It's still collecting data. And it doesn't need to be so long or explicit. Maybe it can be a little tool that's used to collect that data, a little table or something like that. But unfortunately, it's really important to continue to collect that data, even if it's not really severe, because they are looking at it more and more. And when there has been fantastic supports in place, and this is the thing that's tricky to and scary at the same time. But when supports are in place and there has been less and less escalations and things are tracking along well, um, it is also asking the question, could we give it a go to trial less support? Um, and if the answer is no, and you've got clear documentation and reasoning for that, speak to that. If the answer is yes, then it might be exploring what the support could look like moving forward.
Thomasina, did you want to ask a quick question on that? I know this was your question in the chat.
Yes, hi. I just wanted to clarify. I went through AAT for 3 years with my brother. I don't want to declare it because I don't want to unsettle any family member that's here, but it was really quite extreme, where like loss of life was imminent. So now we're um, so we did lose a lot of funding, and now his funding is about to run out. Plan review had in December. The actual plan's meant to end in May. I'm talking to our local minister. I'm exhausted.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to explain all this. Thank you for all the advice you've given because it just is so helpful because you talk from a place of exhaustion. And now I know that I'm not allowed to and you don't want to, but you're just so exhausted and the person can't speak. So it feels 10, what is it? We're in the NDIS now for 10 years and I'm so tired and I don't think I'm that old and I'm a sibling. I think we get fatigued going through this system, especially when you're holding people that you love so dearly. It's a lot of work. I have to rush off, funnily enough, to his psychiatrist appointment online now. Just wanted to thank you so much, and Fighting Chance is doing such an amazing job for our community. I hope, if possible, we could access these slides, but from the bottom of my heart, thank God there's a disability organisation like you guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That's so kind.
And
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
please if there is anything like any questions and stuff that like haven't been answered or you've got anything that you want to like check or anything like that, you can also email. So I understand that AAT or the ART now process is absolutely horrible. And
Yeah.
it becomes really scary then when you have to go back through a review.
Yeah.
It's not just clean cut, black and white, the way that sometimes the legislation and guidelines are described. And so finding a way of communicating about that individual in a way that is really clear to the agency so they can make an informed decision can be tricky. So please reach out if you have any questions
Thank you.
like that.
We will send out the slides, and in the
Yeah.
slides we'll include an email address that you can use with
Amazing.
to submit further questions.
Thank you so much. Have a great
Cheers.
day. See you later. Bye, everyone.
Um, So, so we're going to go on to documentation and what I suppose we are have the understanding of at Fighting Chance and what we're trying to do and how we can work together to help you guys communicate in the best way possible when going to the agency, help to reduce some of that anxiety. But what it means in practice really is there needs to be that connection. So, in all of the information provided to the NDIA, and I talk about this all the time, but there needs to be a golden thread. And so the golden thread needs to be through not just the document, so like a report, but through all of the reports. So it needs to really clearly connect the functional impact of the person's disability, which the NDIA then look at they turn the diagnosis into an impairment, and then the impairment into where it impacts functionally. That needs to be linked to risk and support intensity when we're talking about behavior support and when we're talking about ongoing complex and intensive support. If that connection isn't really clear, the funding decisions may not reflect the person's actual needs. And that's where we might need to go and try and communicate it in a different way. So now we're going to move on to part two of the webinar, and this is just around documentation. So this is kind of, we've got the context of how the NDIA are thinking about more higher cost supports, in particular behaviour support and complex and intensive behaviour support funding. And then we think about, okay, well, if we've got that, how can we help? How can we help the NDIA? It really comes down to communication. How can we communicate clearly to the NDIA so they can make an informed decision about the person's needs? We don't guarantee any funding, nor do we influence the decision. However, we can use documentation to communicate. And that's more important than ever. Before we could kind of day programs or different supports could kind of get through with a quote for service, but not so much anymore. We need to provide a fair bit more information.
And we'll get into this in a little bit more detail, but just to illustrate, I suppose what we're suggesting is that the sooner you can tell us as a provider or as your day program that you will be speaking to the NDIA about almost anything, let us know. Because even if you are, and I've seen this happen, even if you are thinking, well, we're just looking for SIL funding now, my person wants to move out of home. As Alex said, they will look at the whole plan, and it might be that because you didn't have any reports from Plus or from your practitioner, they have assumed that the need for complex and intensive is less or can be lessened. So just let us know. As much notice as possible is great, and then we can get as much evidence as possible ready for you.
Yeah. And the reason why it's so important is because the delegates, so we've got the local area coordinator who some families may be communicating to, other families may be communicating directly with the delegate. regardless of the situation, whether it's LAC or delegate, the delegate is the one that makes the funding decision. So sometimes you have a middle person, the LAC, communicating to the delegate around what support is required based on the conversation and the supporting documentation that's been submitted. But some people speak directly to the delegate, but the delegate makes that decision and they don't observe the program. They don't see supervision levels and why it's needed. They don't witness the behavioral escalations or the things that are happening day to day. They rely entirely on that written material and they don't have much time to review it. So when if you're, whether it's Plus, Avenue, or someone outside, when you're thinking about documentation, and staff are thinking about explaining what is happening, how often it occurs, what supports are in place, whether the risk persists, and why a specific level of supervision is required. There's other things that are included in the letter, but it needs to clearly explain those things throughout, and be aligned to legislation and guidelines so the NDIA can understand. So when you see a document, a report or a letter, there's method to it, and ensuring it is aligned is really helpful. As Stacey said, it helps with for the agency to understand that the support is still needed and why. So what providers, whether Fighting Chance or others, may ask for and why. So the reason for putting this information in is because for many years, and across social media and across lots of things, people are told, don't share the NDIS plan, don't share the reports for varying reasons. But you might find more and more that your providers may be asking for the plan, and then the reports, any correspondence, any notice of upcoming reviews, and they may also be asking for consent to speak with the support coordinators or specialists. And the reason is that golden thread. So to ensure that the information across everyone's communicating in the same way, but also it helps, as Stacey mentioned, if you're going in for home and living funding, they may also look at the day program. We need to make sure that there's a holistic view of the individual and the support needs. So they might say, oh, well, why do you need 2-to-1 support at your day program, but you need one-on-one at home? They're two different environments, totally understand. But it's just about communicating that effectively. And so if the different providers are across the different supports, the different supporting documentation, then there can be that thread throughout, but clearer articulation and communication to the agency. Which is what I just explained there. So I will move on to the next slide. And so the risk of the siloed communication. So when that doesn't happen, and it absolutely isn't the fault of any family. It just very easily happens. There's not there's not anything in place that helps to connect everyone. So unless it's done manually, it's very hard for that to happen. So when they're shared separately between families, Fighting Chance support coordinators, and behaviour support clinicians, the NDIA essentially might receive different angles, different descriptions of risk, different interpretations of supervision, that it might be inconsistent. And that essentially confuses the agency and they will push back. So that alignment creates that clarity for them and they can make an informed decision about the individual. When it's all different, it can be super confusing. it's also then about the communication in that meeting. So we want to make sure that the documents align to the requests needed and the support required. So then when it's communicated in a phone call or a meeting with the NDIA, that the family member or whoever is speaking on behalf of the participant, or whether it's the participant themselves, that they're articulating in a way that aligns to the recommendations that are made by the practitioners and programs, because those requests from the individual or the person supporting the individual carries the most weight. And that might not always feel that way, but the NDIA won't fund something that a practitioner or a provider recommends if the participant or the participant's person doesn't want it. So there needs to be that alignment through it all, and that provides that clarity. So, what effective collaboration looks like. So, notifying early, as Stacey mentioned, fighting chance sharing, whichever enterprise, sharing those documented observations, practitioners clearly describing that clinical risk. Support coordinators understanding supervision level, and everyone uses consistent language about that individual. And that creates that coherent evidence-based picture of the person's needs, which can help the NDIA with making that decision. When documentation is put together as well, it's not ever, or when requests are asked, whether it's for funding or whether understanding the funding or understanding the person's goals or reading different reports, it's not ever in a way to not help the individual. I know 100% at Fighting Chance that every single staff member cares very deeply, and that comes from top down. CEO and founders have always cared very deeply, and it carries through to each staff member. So it's always coming from a place of care and trying to do right by that individual.
The only thing I will add to this is, and this is not to at all feel like we're not trying to work as collaboratively as we can with families, but the reality that we're facing a lot as day programs is that when people aren't funded for complex and intensive, or they might not be funded for one-to-one, but the family still feels they really need that, and we agree. Or it might be that it's 2-to-1 for 2 hours a day and not for the 6 hours of the program. That's really hard for us to operationalize as a program. We pay our staff for 6 hour days, and the program is a 6 hour day. And so recently, I've been working through a lot of cases where we are trying to lessen support hours, but still provide pro bono for those extra 2 hours, or fit someone into a one-to-one support ratio that only has 1-to-2 funding. And we do really want to work as flexibly as we can. But what it means, if we haven't been prepared in the way that we communicate with the NDIS, is that the more and more people like this, the less sustainable our programs are. So we don't want anyone to be left high and dry, and for there to not be a plus or an avenue in the future. Not that that is at all a risk right now, but that's partly why we're talking to this, because as much as possible, we want to give people the support that we are providing now and that we know they rely on. Alex, just a quick question in the chat. Does this all apply to the new planning framework that the NDIA is proposing to introduce?
So I can, I'm assuming is what that question is referring to. So essentially, in a nutshell, they are saying that the ICANN assessment, and there's a lot of pushback, just so you know, still going on. So what this actually rolls out to be, we do not know at this point. But what they are saying is that the ICANN assessment tool and the new changes to that will mean that each individual will need to go through a 3 to 4 hour assessment, and that assessment will determine the person's funding. That there won't need to be any reports or letters or anything like that. That interview, semi-structured interview, will determine the funding. Now,
Is this interview with the participant
yeah.
or the carers or both?
Well, it's meant to be with the participant. So we can kind of see so many gaps in that. With not providing the information from day programs and stuff, it's going to be very tricky for the NDIA to fund people appropriately. So what they end up doing, as I mentioned before, it's a 5 to 6 year rollout. When the NDIA have made changes in the past, it's never really what has been in the media. It's always been a version of it, but there's been some adaptations and stuff that have happened. So we don't actually know what it's going to look like. However, what they have said now is you don't have to provide reports and supporting documentation, but you can. I think what a lot of we will keep an eye on those changes and to understand what that means for the review processes and for the different meetings that you guys will be having. And we'll ensure that the documentation that's provided to you guys or the information provided to you guys is helpful in those situations. But at the moment, we do not have clear guidelines around that. So they are saying it's going to start to be rolled out, but they're not going to look at people with complex disabilities initially. And so they will, but a clinician is meant to be doing that, like an allied health clinician. So they need to employ all the allied health clinicians, and they need to start to roll out that new process. So I think there will be the new process and the old process function both in play, similar to PRODA and PACE. For some time. It would just be communicating to your provider what process you're going through. And then the most appropriate supporting documentation can be prepared for that. And we will adapt to those new processes and how we can best support the participant
Yeah.
and the family.
All right. So, sorry, does that mean they'll interview my son and hope he answers and advocates for himself appropriately?
Well, that's what they're saying, but that's not possible for many, many people in Australia
Yeah.
on the NDIS.
It doesn't, yeah, that doesn't,
No.
yeah.
And that's where there's a lot of pushback. And there's a lot of people that are going up against those reforms and trying to find different ways of doing it. So I think there will be compromises made and there will be, it won't look exactly the way it looks like in articles in the media right now. But we just have to wait and see when more information is released.
Because realistically, if they could do an interview with an NDIA delegate, why would they be on the NDIA if they could advocate for themselves?
Yeah, no, exactly.
So,
So
anyway,
yeah. Um, and from what we were saying before, just obviously there is importance there of early communication because it helps to gather the information needed so you can get it back to the agency. But that's not always the case. So sometimes you get called. So what I said before still very much stands around around. Yeah, that you can ask for more time.
Alex, I'm just conscious of time. We've got about 5 minutes left, and I think maybe one or two more slides.
Yeah, we'll
okay,
just quickly go through that and see if there's any questions. I'll be super fast in the slide, just see if there's any last bits of information that I haven't touched on.
okay.
Um, so, Bella, can you go to the next slide? Yes, so just in summary, we've been talking about the context and then how we can help with documentation and how we can work together. The one other point that I wanted to make as well is please always feel that you can obviously speak to your provider, but that you can speak up to the support coordinator. So, in a case where support isn't funded appropriately, the support coordinator has a role to play there. They need to gather the supporting documentation and go through a review process. Um, uh, Fighting Chance can help by putting the supporting documentation together, but that communication with the agency needs to go through that support coordinator. So, speaking to the support coordinator and having everyone kind of working together in their doing their bits is really important to move that needle forward. Uh, So yes, we are essentially, yes, they're changing how they're applying the rules for, scheme sustainability and other reasons, and it can feel harder than it used to be, but we're here to support and provide the letters and reports and quotes to help ensure the right information is in place when it's needed. So just 4 minutes, but any questions?
Doesn't look like there are any, but there is a message in the chat just now about sending questions through to the hello@fightingchance email address. Oh, just one question here from Mary. How many behaviour support and functional assessments do we need to provide every year, but the behaviour will always be there? So they provide funding for these reports, but slash funding elsewhere.
Yeah. And so, when thinking about supporting documentation, we want to think about relevance. So, a functional assessment absolutely is not needed every single year, but a review of that functional assessment may be required if there have been changes or changes to the recommended supports, or if there needs to be any additional information provided. So, that can be provided in a shorter letter or in a shorter report. With a few additional assessment tools added or a few additional recommendations added. They like to see up-to-date reports. So every year they like to track progress, to see what is working, what's not, what's needed for the new plan period. So whenever there's a conversation with the agency or whenever something is going to change, it's important to review what information, what you're requesting, and ensure that the supporting documentation around that request is there to back it up. And so that may not mean a full functional or a full change to the behaviour support plan. It might just be supporting letter and progress reports. But it's just about seeing, does this supporting documentation that I have reflect what I'm asking for in this new plan period? Some people's plan extends and rolls over for a few years. So when they do come to the point of get into a review, things might be a bit out of date. But also what I've always said as best practice is even if you're not going for a plan review, I would always recommend a review of the last year period each time. And that just it does a couple of things. It helps to give the agency up-to-date information, even if the plan isn't being reviewed, even if it's being rolled over, because when they go into the system and check, oh, should we review this plan? They can see, oh no, everything's still tracking along fine. We can keep rolling it over. And number two, it helps to bring everyone together to ensure that the support is still relevant to the individual, that it's not just this, thing that's being repeated every day, but it's not actually going anywhere. So it can help for a couple of reasons, and I'm not saying it has to be done at all, but I'm saying that, it can be helpful to do that. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Alex. I think we can take one more question. Tracy says, my daughter receives funding for behaviour support by a behaviour therapist for challenging behaviours, but is not at Avenue Plus and is currently at a 1:3 ratio at Avenue. From what you're saying, am I correct in thinking that this funding may be cut in future plans?
Can't guarantee it could be, but I would say that if it's not appropriate to be cut, or if there needs to be a support increase or a ratio increase, then it would be going who in my personal world can help to articulate that in a way that the NDIA can understand and make an informed decision. So it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be cut at all. It's just about looking at whether that support is still effective and beneficial and useful. So
Great.
support documentation might be needed, I guess, is my closing thing. But yes, I've seen that in the chat, the email address is there. Please feel free to flick any questions, or if I haven't answered everything in there, we will answer it. We'll make sure those questions are answered. But please feel free to send any questions through that email.
Indeed. Thanks, Alex, and thanks everyone for attending. I know middle of the day can be hard, but appreciate you coming to this. Send questions through. We will get back to you as soon as we can. And in summary, you're not alone. It is hard and it is stressful. So just reach out.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Fine. Yeah.